we are, I gotta tell you that Thursday's lecture is gonna be a tough lecture. It's gonna be on cell respiration. So if you've had cell respiration, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But so today's lecture really is just to get us ready for that lecture. So it's gonna seem like there's concepts that have no relationship to each other, but they'll come together on Wednesday, I hope. And so there's three things we're going to be looking at today: energy, chemical reactions, and enzymes. Those are the three things we need to understand. And if you look on your notes, your very first page of the lecture, you'll see your flow chart, how things are related, and then you have 19 learning objectives that I want you to know. I want to move pretty quickly through this so we can actually get through pretty much the whole lecture, except for, depends on how fast we move, but maybe the last 2 pages. So I'm going to start with energy, and as we know, all living organisms require energy. So energy is defined as the capacity to do work. That's what it is, capacity to do work. It doesn't have mass, it doesn't pick up any space. We can just sort of know about energy based on its influence on structures, right? So when we look at energy, we see, as I'm sure many of you have had before, we can classify it in 2 ways, as potential energy or as kinetic energy. Potential energy is the energy due to position, right? So, like, for example, we look at a dam, and the water's back behind the dam, that has potential energy because of its position. Kinetic energy is the energy of motion. Kinetic energy can be harnessed to do work, as we'll see, but it's the energy of motion. So when the water comes over the dam or through the dam, the water is now in motion, and it has kinetic energy. That's the key difference. Potential energy only has the potential to do work. Kinetic energy can actually be harnessed to do work. So we see that with certainly dams, and we use dams to generate electricity, for example. Same idea with the bow, pulled with the arrow back, has potential energy because of its position, but it's only when it's released and actually in motion does it have kinetic energy and able to do work. We don't care too much about those types of things. Really what I want you to understand is the 2 ways that we have means of understanding energy in the body, in the human body. And one of those, very important for not so much on Wednesday, but some on Wednesday, we're going to see that when we have a concentration gradient, meaning we have more of any substance, in this case sodium, on one side of the plasma membrane than we do on the other, that's potential energy. It's no different than the water at the top of the dam. So if you were going to draw yourself a simple figure of this, you would have, as true of all cells in the body, that I know of anyway, there's high sodium outside the cell, and there's relatively low sodium inside the cell. And we'll see that with neurons and muscles and other cells. Because of that concentration gradient, that has potential energy. When that sodium, or whatever substance it might be, hydrogen or whatever, is allowed to move through a channel, it now has kinetic energy, and that kinetic energy can be harnessed. And we're going to see that. We're going to see it with hydrogen ions, and later in the course we'll see it actually with sodium. The other one that's important for our work is the fact that when we look at atoms, and we know that electrons are in these shells based on our work in lab last week, the further out the electron is, the greater its energy, right? So it has potential energy as it sits here, but not until that electron falls, right, where it falls into the same atom, just into a lower shell, and they're represented here with stairs, then it has kinetic energy. And we're going to see that as well on Wednesday. We're going to see electrons falling, but in the case of Wednesday's lecture, we're going to see those electrons being actually passed from one structure to another in what's called the electron transport chain, right? And you've got to remember, when those electrons are falling, it's no different than anything else falling. That can be harnessed to do work, okay? You okay with the concentration gradients and the movement of electrons? All right. Now, so we have these 2 ways that we think about energy, potential and kinetic, meaning does it have the potential to do work, or can it actually do work because it's in motion? So we have to categorize the different classes of energy as either being potential energy or as kinetic energy. The key one for us, for our body, that's potential energy, is chemical energy. Now, where is chemical energy stored? That was one of the questions I asked on your quiz. Chemical bonds, right? Because what is a bond? It's electrons. Electrons, as we're going to see, are energy. And so we have every one of these bonds, every one of them has potential energy that's stored there. Now, one thing to keep in mind, typically when we make a chemical bond, energy is going to be required to make that bond, and when we break that chemical bond, energy is going to be released. And that's what we're going to see Wednesday when we take the bonds in glucose and break them and release that potential energy out of them. Okay? More on that Wednesday. Now, the three molecules, every molecule in your body holds energy, potential energy, because it has bonds in it. But these are the three I want you to understand that are really critical. This is, you might recognize it from lab last week. This is a triglyceride. This is a fat, right? Specifically a triglyceride. Oh my gosh, look at all the bonds. Huge number. That's why we store our energy as fat, right? This is a form that we do long-term energy storage because it's a very densely packed form of these chemical bonds. That's long-term storage. We have a more immediate form of energy that we can use. This molecule you may recognize. These would be carbons here. Remember the ring links there. That's glucose. And we have glucose molecules that float around our blood, right? One of the things you'll be concerned about is your patient's blood glucose level. How many of these molecules, what's the concentration of that in the person's blood? But look at the bonds. Plenty of them, right? But we'll see that we can access glucose sometimes when we can't as easily access triglycerides. So this is considered to be a more immediate form of energy. But it's this molecule, and only this molecule, that a cell can use. Anybody know what that thing is? ATP. Right. This is called adenosine triphosphate. And to me, it's weird, all right? When I'm thinking about energy, I either think fat, I think sugars, right? But this is a nucleotide. Look at it. This is the sugar ribose, right? We were talking about nucleotides last week in lab. Here's the base, the nitrogenous base. So when you put these two together, adenine and ribose, they're collectively called adenosine. And then that adenosine could have 1, 2, or 3 phosphates on it. Here we're seeing 3. So this is adenosine triphosphate. What's it called? We remove one of them. Diphosphate, right? Adenosine diphosphate, or ADP. This is ATP. And that's what we're going to actually be generating when we talk about our cellular respiration on Wednesday. We're going to take glucose, break the bonds in it through cell respiration, and take that energy and transfer it over to make ATP molecules. It's going to take a whole lecture to just describe how cells can do that. Nuclear energy is not important for us in this class, but I do want to mention it just to be complete. This is really not important for the body because we don't really tap into nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is the energy in a nucleus, right? Like in uranium or nuclear power plants, they're accessing the energy that's stored in that nucleus of those atoms. Now, you'll notice, if you're paying attention, that when we look at this chemical energy that's up here, there's one molecule you don't see, and that is what? Many people think this is the best source of energy. It's not. We'll talk about why. You don't see proteins. You don't need protein in your diet for energy. You need protein in your diet so that when those protein comes into your digestive tract, you break it down into amino acids. And you need those amino acids to build the new proteins for your proteins that are worn out. Remember what a protein's made up of, right? It's got an amine group, remember that? And an acid group, that's why it's called an amino acid. Some hydrogen in there and an R group. It's this problem right here. This is a contaminant. Look at this. This is beautiful. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, pure burning. For pure burning fuel, maybe for cars or whatever. This is a contaminant on this potential fuel that has to be removed. And what that becomes, some of you may know, is urea. And urea we got to get rid of how? Yeah, exactly, by peeing, right? We take it out. And so if we cleave that off, liver does it, takes it off, and then the kidney's going to get rid of it. High protein diets, as we'll talk about next semester, very, very hard on the liver and the kidney because of those steps that have to be taken. So protein is not an energy molecule. It can be, but it's really not the best. Okay? Just something to keep in the back of your head. You cannot convince bodybuilders of that thought, right? Okay, so let's go over then. We've done the potential energy. which is really our main one, is chemical energy. And then we have these different forms of kinetic energy. So if they're all kinetic energy, we know that they're energy having to do with motion. So the first one we want to look at is electrical energy. Electrical energy is simply the movement of any charged particle, whatever the charged particle might be. So electricity is one example of electrical energy. Many students try to use those terms interchangeably. They're not. What is electricity? The flow of what charged particle? Electrons. In our body, when we talk about electrical energy, we're talking about the movement of ions, specifically sodium and potassium and some other ones. But still charged particles. Right? So when we talk, and you'll write an essay about nerves and sending impulses, you're going to be talking about electrical energy. The second one is mechanical energy. Mechanical energy is the energy where an object moves due to an applied force. So I can move my skeleton because my muscles contract on and move the body part. Right? I'm exerting an applied force. The heart pumps blood because it's exerting an applied force to the blood to move it through the chambers and then through the blood vessels. Right? So that's considered to be mechanical energy. The third one is the one that was on your quiz. This is sound energy. And sound waves are always exerted by some kind of vibrating object. Could be a guitar string, piano string, drums, your vocal cords, we'll see later in the course. They vibrate, and what they do is they compress in the air, in this case, they compress the air molecules so there's more here and there's less behind. And so you literally get these sound waves. And when those compressed air molecules come in to the ear, as we'll see later this semester, they're going to make that tympanic membrane vibrate, which will then move your ossicles, which will then, as we'll see, allow you to hear. Okay? That's sound energy. It's kind of cool in terms of when you really think about the fact that it is really energy. If you've ever seen those commercials where the people clap their hands and the lights go either on or off or whatever, that's sound energy. Right? They're using those compressed air molecules to make the light turn off or on. This one is electromagnetic energy, or sometimes called radiant energy. A couple of things I want you to know about this. It's simply when you have, it's kind of a strange definition. It's considered to be the compression of molecules in a solid, liquid, or gas. It's electromagnetic waves traveling in the universe. Sorry about that. And so what I want you to know mainly, though, is the spectrum of radiant energy, electromagnetic, and a couple features about it. Here's the visible spectrum. This is the part of the spectrum, the reason we call it, is because our retina can actually detect those particular wavelengths, and then the brain interprets it as color, right? Purple or green or red or whatever it is. If you go to the left of that, right, ultraviolet light, X-rays, gamma rays, there's an increasing in frequency of the wavelengths, right? Increasing frequency of the waves, and there's increasing energy. So anything to the left here has greater energy than visible light. Here's what you got to know, though, as a healthcare practitioner. Anything to the left here has sufficient energy to penetrate into your body cells and cause mutations of your DNA. And ultraviolet light is really the one more people should really be concerned about. We know we're concerned about X-rays, and if you even understand what gamma rays are, they're even much worse than X-rays. But ultraviolet rays also have enough energy. And so when people lay in tanning beds and they lay out in the sun, there is ultraviolet light, and it is penetrating their skin, even if they have suntan lotion on, and it is mutating their DNA. And it's a collective process that over their time can cause skin cancer, right? We have less ozone out there to protect us, and so more and more of that ultraviolet light is reaching the earth. And so it's a big problem. There's young people, even in their 20s, that now have skin cancer and have died of it, right? Just because of this. Everything to the right, though, has not insufficient energy to penetrate, nothing to worry about. Infrared light, for example, is like heating lamps for your hamburger, like old days. Microwaves would be here. People go crazy about microwaves, thinking, you don't have to worry about microwaves. Look where they lay, right, in terms of energy. And then nobody worries about the fact there's radio waves all over the place, right, that your antennas can pick up. They're very, very low energy. All right, that you should know. That great. I'll certainly ask you questions about it. The last concept is heat, and heat is energy that's not available to do work. All heat is random movement of molecules or ions or whatever the substance is. So heat is not available to do work. You can't use it, because remember, it's just random movement of molecules as they move. If we heat something up, all we're doing is making them move faster. Okay, last idea relative to energy is energy has two laws called the thermodynamics, right? Laws of thermodynamics. Thermo means heat, dynamics means to change. What's the first law state?
Energy can't be created or destroyed, only changed.
Excellent. Energy can't be created or stored. So you got what you got, right? But it can be converted. That's what the first law says. You can convert it from one form, right? Like chemical energy to sound energy or whatever. You can convert energy. But what's the second law say?
Every time energy is transformed from one form to another, energy
Right.
converted is heat.
Heat is always produced, right? So the second law says, yeah, you can convert it, but you're going to pay a price, and the price is always going to be heat. And heat can't do work. So it means that we get, some people, if you know the laws of entropy, we won't get into all that, but first law and second law. I'll give you an example. Tell me about how you drove your car in here this morning, or somebody drove you in. What was the energy source that you used? What
Gas.
form? It was gas. What form?
Potential.
It is potential. What kind?
Chemical.
Chemical, right? Gas. Chemical energy. Okay, we put it in the car, we pass on that gas pedal, and then what? What are we converting it to?
Mechanical energy.
Excellent. Mechanical energy. We're going to move the car down the road. But what else do we see converted? Can you hear it?
Heat.
Can you hear your car? Sound energy and heat. Lots of heat. I think the percentage of conversion from actual chemical energy into mechanical energy, the movement, is like 35%. Really low. Okay. Have you ever heard that you can't make 100% conversion for energy? Okay. That's really low, 35. All right, how about your body? What if you're going to be a track runner and you're going to run down and you're going to do, or just walk, right? What's the energy we're using to walk or run?
Chemical.
No, chemical, yeah, we're eating food, that's why we eat food, for energy. So we're gonna burn our fuel, our sugar, our fat, whatever, to power our body. So what are we converting it to? Mechanical. What else? Heat. One of the things we intuitively know that when we get cold, what do we start to do?
Shiver.
Well, yeah, and we start to move around if we have any brain, right? We're like, oh my gosh, I'm cold. Start stomping your feet, right? Because you're going to generate heat based on that second law. All right. This is your summary figure. That's the COV. Puts all those concepts of potential and kinetic energy and the different types of energy, forms of energy, and the laws there together. Okay, that's in your textbook. It's in the first and second edition. Okay, that's it. That's energy. Switching gears. I forgot to turn this one off. I need to draw a little bit. Now, if we look at chemical reactions, that's our second concept. Doesn't seem like it has anything to do with the first one, but oh well. We have chemical reactions. And when you look at chemical reaction, there's really three ways that you have to be able to describe that chemical reaction. First one is, we're going to talk about it first, is chemical change. What is the chemical change? The second one is what's the energy change? And the third one is, was it irreversible or reversible? So, chemical reactions. First one we're going to do is we're going to look at how we describe chemical reactions based on the chemical change. Three ways. We can talk about it being a decomposition reaction, synthesis reaction, or an exchange reaction. Decomposition means what? Breaking down, right? You're digesting, something's being digested. So we have a molecule called sucrose, that's table sugar, made of glucose and fructose. And we're going to allow this relatively complex structure be broken down into something similar. Right? In this case, we break the bond between those two monosaccharides and we reduce glucose and fructose. So we take, if we're going to be a generic, we take A, B that are hooked together and we're making A plus B. Notice that water was added during this process. So in general, what would we say is happening? What kind of reaction is this?
Hydrolysis.
Hydrolysis. We're using water split. But all decomposition reactions have to do with breaking down. Everybody good with that one? So collectively, all decomposition reactions in the body are referred to as what? That was a quiz question.
Catabolism.
Catabolism. Now, if you're sick, when I first started thinking, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm a cat. I eat my cat. I go to Chinese restaurants regularly. Cat, I break it down. That's catabolism. I thought, well, that's kind of sick. So you can think of cat eating out of the bowl, or what you said, which is really good, Scott. Catabolism is like catastrophic, and you're destroying stuff with a catastrophe. So that might even be an easier way to remember. What is the term, by the way, for all the chemical reactions in the body? That's all. Or the cat breaks stuff all the time. I like that too. You have a cat now. Synthesis reaction in comparison is we're taking something that's relatively simple and we're making it into something more complex. Water was lost. So what happened?
Dehydration.
Dehydration. Sometimes the full name is dehydration synthesis, right? And so this would take something that we'll say is A plus B, and we're making AB. Now, what's the collective term for all synthesis reactions is anabolism. So, for example, you may have heard of anabolic steroids, right? And why do they call them anabolic steroids? They build muscle, right? That's why these people do it, right? They inject themselves with anabolic steroids, and we'll talk about some of the risks of that later, but not today. Okay. Now, the last category is an exchange reaction. Exchange reaction is actually a combination of decomposition and synthesis together, in which a bond is broken, or bonds are broken, and new ones are formed. So you get synthesizing something new. The exchange can involve atoms, molecules, ions, or electrons. And so, how many of you have ever heard of people taking creatine? Bodybuilders, football players, creatine supplements. We'll talk about creatine when we do muscle, but this is creatine phosphate. So without the phosphate, there would be creatine. That's what it looks like in terms of a molecule. And so we'll see creatine phosphate is in our muscle tissue. And when we need energy, what happens is this phosphate can actually be transferred over to ADP. That's the exchange. So you're going to break the bond here, the cell can, muscle cell, break it and put it on ADP so you get more ATP. That's why people do it. Talk about whether it's actually effective or not later, but that's the reaction. Okay. Now, one additional thing you need to add to your notes relative to this topic, which is there is one type of exchange reaction that we really need to understand for our work Wednesday. This, we had a couple questions on your quiz about it, which is oxidation reduction. Or sometimes abbreviated redox reactions. So what's actually exchanged is what? Electrons. So we see the exchange of electrons, in which electrons are moved from one substance to another. So for the substance that loses the electrons, or electron, what do we say has happened to that substance?
Oxidized.
So that's where that Leo comes from, right? Lose electrons, the substance is oxidized. Those electrons are going to then be transferred over to another substance, which then gains the electrons, or electrons. In this case, this substance is then reduced. Because Leo says, or goes, gain electrons are reduced. it's kind of confusing at first, because how can you gain something and be reduced? And a negative, right? These are negative structures. So I tell students, think about it, if you got bad habits, if you acquire bad habits over your lifetime, people would say, oh, you're reduced in stature, right? So instead of, in terms of society. So that may help you remember. Lose electrons, you're oxidized, but if you gain them, you are reduced. All right? So let's say you have the following, which we're going to look at on Wednesday. This particular molecule, you don't have to know, okay? Other than the fact you should know that it's called NAD+. But if you look at it, you're like, oh, it's got 2 ribose sugars, there's adenine base, something called nicotinamide, who cares, right? So we call it NAD+, that's what everybody calls it, right? Nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide is its full name, but everybody calls it NAD+. What do you need to know about NAD+? By looking at this figure, we can see that one of the things that I should mention to you over here is that these electrons that are being passed can either be passed alone, or sometimes we'll see them hidden with a hydrogen ion in the form of a hydrogen atom. So sometimes it'll be the electron by itself, sometimes it's a hydrogen. And that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing, here's a positive charge here, so an electron can be gained right at that spot, as we'll see. And up here, we're going to gain the hydrogen atom and put it here. So 2 electrons, one hidden, one not, can be gained by the NAD+. So when it comes over here, it's going to look like this. It comes in there, there's the hydrogen atom. Now here's the question for you. When this happens, when NAD+ gains that, NAD+, and it becomes NADH, what happened to the NAD+?
It was reduced.
What did it gain? Did it lose the electrons or gain them?
Gained.
Gained them. So what is it? It's reduced. Now the other thing I want you to keep in your mind, very, very important, whatever the electrons are doing, that's representing energy. Remember how the electrons can fall, right? So electrons in our mind are the same thing as energy. So then I say to you, which of these 2 substances holds more energy? Does the NAD+ or the NAD? I'm asking the same question I just asked you. Which one has more electrons? NADH. So which one holds more energy? NADH. In fact, its nickname, I'd like to think of it as a temporary holder for energy, right? For electrons, right? So we're going to see that during the process of cell respiration, NAD+ is going to be, as we'll see later, a coenzyme. It's going to come up and it's going to say, give me your electrons. I'll hold them for you temporarily. And then I'll give them back to you, right? So they're going to temporarily hold energy for us until we can cash it on. All right. Everybody good with that? So we then move to the second way we can describe chemical reactions. And so if we were doing a flow chart up here, relative to the board, we would see we have decomposition, what? Synthesis and exchange. And where's oxidation reduction go? These redox reactions. Right, it's a special form of an exchange reaction where the electrons are what are being exchanged. Now we go to the second way, we can look at the same chemical reactions. We can say that the reaction is either exergonic or what? Endogonic. So here's an example of a graph showing an exergonic. Here's the way to remember. Exergonic reactions have energy that are exiting from the reaction. Exergonic. So we have our substance, our reactants, or our substrates, are sitting on this energy diagram. Here's the course of the reaction, that have more energy than the products do. So when the substrates or reactants went through the reaction, they're going to release their energy to become products. So here we see the energies released, right? Exergonic. Right? Remember, it's exiting. The energy is. If you had to guess this type of reaction, would you think, in terms of its chemical change, to be a decomposition or synthesis reaction?
Decomposition.
Yeah, so almost always, I can't think of any cases where it's not true, in which decomposition reactions tend to be exergonic reactions. So when we're decomposing, we're digesting things, energy's coming out during that process. And sure enough, that is the case. Glucose is being digested into carbon dioxide and water. Were bonds broken, you think, during that process?
Yes.
Energy is released, right? Because whenever we break bonds, energy is released. If we compare that to endergonic, ender, meaning I like to think of as you're coming in, right? We're adding energy into the system. And so here your substrates or reactants have less energy than your product, and the only way that's going to happen is energy supplied, right? It's put into it during an endergonic reaction. So we take amino acids and we make them into proteins, we've got to put energy in. And that's a whole lecture next week. We'll talk about that. So are these tending to be, these endergonic reactions tending to be decomposition or synthesis?
Synthesis.
And it makes the logic, I think, is logical in terms of, if you think about synthesizing more complex structures, it's probably going to add, energy is probably needed for that process. All right, this is what you got to put together in your head for why we have to make ATP through cellular respiration. In terms of this figure, what I want you to see is this. This is adenosine diphosphate. This is adenosine triphosphate. So the only difference is we have another phosphate there with an energy bond, right, a new bond. So it took energy to make it. Where did that energy come from? It comes from cell respiration. So if you had to guess, is cell respiration an exergonic reaction or an endergonic reaction? Are you getting you're going to supply energy to make this new bond. So this has to be, cellular respiration has to be exergonic, right? This exergonic reaction, releasing the energy to supply the energy for this. Why? Because cells can only use ATP, right? So here's the ATP, and they then take that ATP and they break that bond and they get the ADP back. And there's the phosphate comes off. What's this energy release? Why do we do that? Where's that energy going to drive what? All the endergonic reactions in the body. So ATP is the coupling agent between exergonic reactions that are giving up their energy, as we'll see in cell respiration, and then we're going to make ATP, which then allows us then to power our endergonic reactions. Everybody good with that?
That's just a side note, right? The cell respiration, because
Yes.
that's in its little box saying endergonic reaction. Okay,
Right.
so
So exergonic cell respiration is an exergonic reaction that's going to supply the energy to make ATP, so that later we can take the ATP and drive our endergonic reactions. Yes, that was a good one. Thank you. You good? All right. Not ready for that next slide. Let's go to the next page. There is the last way we categorize chemical reaction. So we've done phase on chemical change, we've done phase on energy, and the third is whether it's irreversible or reversible. And this is, I think, the easiest of all three, because all you have to do is look at the reaction. So if you have A plus B, and you have the arrow going one way, it could be AB being split, doesn't matter. But you're looking at the arrow. And if the arrow goes in one direction, it's irreversible. So what happens over time? Your substrates or reactants decrease, and your products increase. That's an irreversible. We don't know how, to what extent. Is it 100 an hour? Is it how many are we making? We don't know. But over time, we know we're getting less of this, we're getting more of this. Compared to a reversible reaction in which we have, let's just take one of them, A plus B becoming AB, then you look for is the fact that the arrow goes backwards as well. That means that the reaction proceeds this way and it proceeds this way. So A plus B becomes AB, and AB says, I don't want to be AB anymore, and splits back into A plus B. If nothing disturbs this chemical reaction, it reaches what we call equilibrium. Right? What's that mean? As much AB is coming A plus B as A plus B is becoming AB. So over time, what happens to the amount of our substrates and products? No change. So no change over time, unless you disturb the equilibrium, right? So one of the equations I absolutely want you to memorize is the one I put on the quiz today. This is one, put 10 stars by it. You want to know this reaction. And this reaction is like this. CO2 plus water becomes what? H2 CO3, which is carbonic acid. The arrow has to go both ways. You just smash them together, right? H2, got that. How many carbons? 1, got that. How many oxygens? 2 here, 1 here, 3. You got yourself your molecule. That's all you gotta remember. Put the whole thing together. This thing will split because it's unstable and it's an acid. Acids always give up, based on our work in lab last week, hydrogen ions. So we get a hydrogen ion. This is acid. Very strong acid. Now, know that. What I'm going to tell you now, you don't have to know. But this is the reason I'm going to have you memorize it. You're going to need it for cardiovascular, respiratory, and urinary, and fluid and electrolyte balance lectures. So you're going to see it so many times you're going to be sick of it. Right? But here's what I want you to see in terms of your patient. If you have a patient who has a respiratory disorder, COPD, severe emphysema, or really bad asthma, bronchitis, what happens to the CO2 in their body? They can't effectively get rid of CO2, CO2 levels increase. Now, based on your work in chemistry, all you guys have had chemistry, what happens to this chemical reaction as we get more substrates? Right? It's like sort of like tilting the seesaw, right? So what happens is it's going to drive the equation which way? You get more and more CO2 and plenty of water in the body, or 2/3 water. What happens? Will you make more product or less? More. So this is going to drive it to the right, and you're going to get more acid. So in your mind, remember that. CO2 means more acid. If you have more acid, could the patient actually go into what's called respiratory acidosis?
Yes.
Yes, it's one of the causes of death, right? Respiratory acidosis. Let's take a different example. Let's say you have a person climbing a high altitude mountain, really going up. So what happens? The air thins, less oxygen, so they start to breathe faster. I think because they need the oxygen, but they get rid of more CO2. So CO2 levels now drop in the body. So if there's less substrates, which way would the equation go? It goes to the left. So what happens to your acid level in the body? You have less acid. You have less acid? Alkalosis. You go into respiratory alkalosis, which they have happened many times, more than we'd like. They get disoriented, and they would actually die on top of that. That's how significant that equation actually is, as you'll see. You don't have to know any of that I just told you, other than the equation. But I tried to tell you why you have to learn stuff. That's the reason. All right, last thing relative to chemical reactions. Reaction rate is how much product you're going to be able to produce per time. But when we look at this, no matter, we didn't see this on our last graph. When we look at it, there's always this energy barrier that must be overcome for a reactant to become a product. That activation energy is the energy that's required. Now, if you're in chemistry class, it's no problem. You just turn on the Bunsen burner, you put a little energy in, and you can get your reactants to go to product. Right? In the body, we can't. So instead, as many of you know, we have enzymes. Okay? Which brings us to our last topic of today, which are enzymes. So, enzymes. Can't overstate their importance. Literally thousands of them in the body. So one of the things I want you to know is, well, what is an enzyme? Well, you know it's a catalyst. Right? It's going to make a reaction go faster. But its function, if I said to you, what is the function of enzymes in our body? Is they will lower or decrease the activation energy. They're going to decrease the size of the amount of energy that's required for the reaction to go. Thus, there's more product produced per time. Right? So we're going to get more product per time. For example, if we have this reaction here, and we don't have an enzyme present, we would produce about 100 molecules per hour. No, yeah, not too shabby, until you compare it with the catalyst, the enzyme that actually is called carbonic anhydrase. That enzyme, if it's present, we would get somewhere in the neighborhood of 2.16 billion in an hour, right? So that's how effective enzymes can be, certainly for that reaction anyway. All right, so what's the function of enzymes? Lower the activation.
Lower the activation energy.
All right, now, what's an enzyme look like in terms of its structure?
A globular protein.
Excellent. It's a globular protein with
An active site.
an active site. So here's my simplified version of an enzyme. The globular protein,
Looks like
you
Jesus.
got a little, I know, first grade, level here in terms of artistic ability, but there it is. There's the active site, right? Globular protein with an active site. This active site has specificity, meaning that only one type of substrate will find its way and actually match complementary to the active site. Where are enzymes located? This is one of the questions on your quiz.
In the cell,
Everywhere,
out of the cell.
right? In the cell, in the plasma membrane, out of the cell. They're everywhere. DNA polymerase, sucrase, lactase, maltase, pepsin, they're all over the place, right? Everywhere. Now, how do enzymes actually function? Well, it depends. It depends on whether you want to have a decomposition reaction or you want to have a synthesis reaction. Because enzymes can function in, different enzymes, but they can function in either way. So let's take the enzyme example called lactase. You ever heard of being lactose intolerant?
Mhm.
Okay, well, lactose, you may know, is milk sugar, right? And milk sugar is a disaccharide. Lactose is a disaccharide. And it's composed of glucose plus this other monosaccharide called galactose. On together. So this thing together is called lactase. Here's lactase. So what happens is lactose will fit nicely into the active site of lactase, and only lactase. No other enzyme can break it down. So they have the way that enzymes function is called the induced fit. So the induced fit is best thought of like giving a hug, right? So imagine I'm lactase, I'm an enzyme, and I'm going to give my daughter a hug. I say, how you doing today? And I'll go up and say, how are you today? Like this, right? Rigid. No, she comes in, I mold my body around her, she molds her. Get this? So that's called the induced fit. So when this is like a love relationship, right? Come on in, gonna hug, and when we do that what happens is it puts torque on that bond that's holding the two parts together, weakens the bond. So what happens to the activation energy that we need? It's less, right? It's reduced. So less energy is required to break the bond breaks, and you release your product. Now, another sadder way to think about these types of enzymes are as divorce lawyers, right? In which, sorry if anybody's going through any of that, but here's the divorce lawyer, here's the couple, you put them in there, the divorce lawyer weakens the bond and releases the individuals. Right. As some of you would have told me, right, when you're going through all that craziness. Now, in comparison, different enzymes can work more like matchmakers, right? Like an enzyme called glycogen synthetase. What's it going to do? If you had to guess, it's going to synthesize glycogen. What's glycogen? Remember, polymer glucoses. So here we have our individual glucoses. Here's what this enzyme does. Oh, come on in. It's right there, glycogen. You hold on a minute. Hey, glucose, you come on over here. Put you guys in the right place. And hey, how you do? Here's glucose. How you do, glycogen? Nice. And a bond will be formed because it puts them in the right orientation, right place, right time, introduces them, and you can make a bond more easily, and then you can release the product. Matchmaking.
Will that just keep going on and
That's a
create that
great
chain?
question. So yeah, in fact, this chain, it shifts over and a new one can come in. And glycogen can be hundreds to thousands of glucoses long. But most of the molecules you see here is not actually in the enzyme, it's sort of sticking out.
Mhm.
Right? The only place we need is where we're going to form that next one. The other question that's sort of related to that is can these enzymes work over and over again? Yeah, put the substrate in, release the product. Put a new substrate in, release the product. And so you can use them over and over again, which is certainly a nice feature. Now, the other thing I want you to keep in mind, have you ever heard of cofactors and coenzymes?
Mm-hmm.
Here's the difference, very critical. cofactor, we're going to let this little ball represent it, is an inorganic substance, inorganic, usually a metal. Could be magnesium or zinc or something, right? And this cofactor literally is a factor that physically has to be in the enzyme. So this inorganic substance has got to be there. Now, do all enzymes require cofactors?
No.
So many enzymes don't. But if they do, in order for that enzyme to function, the cofactor has to be there. It's one of the reasons we need minerals in our diet, is for these cofactors. All right, that's a cofactor. Compare that to the other substance, which is a coenzyme. Here's the enzyme, here's the coenzyme. They're on the side, right? And a coenzyme is an organic molecule. This one's organic. And they're typically vitamins or some derivative of vitamin. So one of the reasons, not all the reasons, but one of the reasons we need vitamins in our diet is because they serve as coenzymes. So coenzymes, remember, are physically separate from enzymes. In fact, these things are, I like to think of them as being promiscuous, right? In which you have all these different enzymes out there, and this coenzyme does one function. It might be like NAD+, we'll see as a coenzyme. Its job is to come over and grab hydrogen electrons, and it does that. But if an enzyme needs that particular job done, this coenzyme can do it for a multitude of different enzymes because it's carrying out some function. Okay? That's one of the reasons, by the way, we don't need high dose of vitamins. Many people go crazy about vitamins. You need a certain amount, and that's all you need. You get extra, what good is it going to do you? There's only a certain amount of jobs that need to be done. It's like having extra people around, too many, cooks in the kitchen or something like that, right? You only need a certain amount. Okay, coenzymes, cofactors, everybody good? Good news. All right, next page. We're looking at this table. First question, first statement I want to make is you do not have to know this table. Okay? So you're like, okay, so why do you put it in our notes? You don't have to memorize it. What I want to do is help you to understand how chemists took thousands of enzymes and tried to make them make sense, right? So there's all these different enzymes in the body, and they were able to, I think, quite amazingly, chemists are very meticulous and organized. If you ever looked at a periodic table, you know what I mean. These are the 6 categories they came up with. 6. That's quite good, right? So my mind can get around 6. So I say to you, all right, if you start to put all this stuff together, what do you think the enzyme class oxidoreductases do? What are they engaged in?
Electrons.
Oxidation reduction, transfer of electrons. So transfer of electrons, sure enough. Here's one that we're going to see on Wednesday. D, what's D mean? Take away. What's it taking away? A hydrogen, but what's a hydrogen hide? An electron. So a dehydrogenase is going to be using NAD+, no surprise, and it's going to transfer the hydrogen over to it. We're going to see that one. Peroxidase, we don't care about for this. Transferase transfers a functional group. Remember in lab last week we learned about functional groups. Phosphate, amino acid, amino groups, carboxylic acid. There's functional groups, different ones are transferred. Here's the one we're going to see Wednesday, kinase. A kinase enzyme is very kind. It transfers phosphate. Well, that makes sense if we want to make ATP, right? Adenosine triphosphate. So we're going to see kinases. They transfer a phosphate from ATP to a different cell. Hydro, what do you think? Water. So it splits a chemical bond using water. What do you think? What do you think? Well, we'll start with sucrase. It's a hydrolase. What's it split? Sucrose. Lipase? Lipase. Protease? Proteins. Phosphatase? Phosphate. Right? Who's a phosphate? So sometimes just knowing the names, you can sort of figure out what they're doing. What about an isomerase? Converts isomer. Just takes the molecule and rearranges it, like glucose to galactose or glucose to fructose. We're going to see some isomerases. And we're going to also see mutase, which is one type of isomerase. The ligate means to put together, like film. When you're editing a film, you'll cut it and then you ligate it. They're putting things together. And lyase is splitting the chemical bond in the absence of water. And we don't worry too much about that for this next call. Okay. Everybody good? Now, since I don't want you to know that table, I just want to introduce you to some of the enzymes we're going to see Wednesday. What I do want you to know is how do you recognize an enzyme? How do we name enzymes? And so one of the big clues is the quiz question I asked you, which is every time you see the ACE ending, you have an enzyme. Sucrase, lactase, DNA polymerase, RNA polymerase. If it has the ACE ending, glycogen synthetase, they're all enzymes. That's a big clue. Unfortunately, there are enzymes that don't have the ACE ending, like pepsin. Who the heck would know it's an enzyme? Anybody know where it is? It's in your stomach, right? There's also trypsin. It's a different one. It's in your small intestine. So there are exceptions. So they're like somebody messed up, gave them nicknames, they don't follow the rules, right? But in the full name of the enzyme, if it's following rules, it will have the ACE ending. You also can see and help you to remember that sometimes the substrate or the product will be part of the name, like glycogen synthetase. What were we making? We were making this product called glycogen. Or it might be sucrase. What are we doing? We're splitting sucrose. It also might be, in fact, the process that's involved. So again, glycogen synthetase. Yeah, you're making a product and you're synthesizing it, right, from glucose. So that helps you, hopefully, to figure out how they're getting the names. All right, what do you think pyruvate dehydrogenase does?
Takes water away from the pyruvate.
Cellular respiration.
Yep, it's in cellular respiration. It takes away hydrogen from pyruvate. DNA polymerase helps form the polymer, what we call DNA. How about lactase? That's one we talked about. Breaks down lactase. All right. Enzyme reactions. Enzymes are very thin. They like conditions just so. And so one of the things I'll ask you about is, how do we get an enzyme to be more effective or less effective? And so one of the ways we can get more product per time, right, rate of the reaction, product per time, is we can actually increase the amount of substrate, the concentration of substrate. Think about it. If you have 10 enzymes, we'll make it simple, and you have 10 substrates, well, you gotta wait for each one to find an enzyme, right, and be converted to product. But if you have 10 enzymes and you increase the substrates to 100, the likelihood of them finding an enzyme is much more likely. But remember, as the concentration of the substrates increase, up to the point that the enzymes are all saturated. Because at that point, it doesn't matter how much more substrate you put in there, you can't get any more product per time. Right? So that's one variable. The second variable is what I asked you about on the quiz, which is what's the relationship of enzymes and temperature. And here we see, and this is extremely important for practitioners to understand, is that as the temperature increases, the enzyme reactions in the body are also going to increase. That's why fevers, we're now, some of you probably know and hearing, they're saying don't lower the fever, right? If you're sick or with a cold or a flu or whatever, because this is a protective mechanism of the body in which the body raises the body temperature, the normal body temperature, to 100, 101, 102. And what it's doing is twofold. It's increasing all the chemical reactions in the body, all the enzymes are more effective, but it also inhibits the growth of these microorganisms. They don't like it that warm. And so we're going to retard their growth and then also accelerate our healing process. Up to the point in which we spike that fever, it's too high, the proteins are denaturing, and then, right? So especially young children can spike those high fevers, and we're looking, it's a big problem, 106, 107, 108, depending on the person, and you start to see brain trauma, damage, and potentially death. And what's happening is the proteins are actually denaturing, they're unfolding inside that person's body. That's temperature. pH. This was the one I showed you in lab last week. If you didn't get to, remember I told you to go to the Learning Support Center and take a look at it on that CD, History of Life, under protein, and you go to tertiary structure. We saw that every enzyme likes a certain pH, whatever it might be. In this particular example, we're seeing an enzyme that likes a pH, its optimal pH is 7. Maybe it's salivary amylase in the mouth. If we either decrease or increase the amount of hydrogen ions, right? We get more hydrogen ions, more acidic, or we lose the hydrogen ion, become more basic, what happens to the reaction rate? It falls off. Either direction, it doesn't matter. And I showed you how the hydrogen are either being put on or taken off, and that enzyme or protein is unfolding. So optimal pH is what we expect. And so that's why we see next semester, we'll see that salivary amylase, like we swallow food with it, goes in the stomach, which has a pH of 2, denatures, it's shut down. The enzymes of pepsin and other ones, they go into the small intestine where the pH is 9, they get denatured and shut off. And so it's a very regulated way as the substances move down through GI, because each enzyme likes its own pH. Okay. We're going to save those last 2 pages because I haven't done them yet with my other 2 groups as well. So we'll finish up on Wednesday, just so you know. Here's a big hint for you guys. That lecture is tough on for you guys Thursday. It's a tough lecture on Thursday, and make sure you do and learn as much as you can before you come in. Be prepared. The other thing is, next week, what's the deal with next week?
We don't have lecture.
We don't have lecture on Tuesday, but we do have lab. Okay, very good. So I'll see you guys Thursday.
You still want us
Lab
to
day.
complete that lecture by ourselves,